This program is brought to you in partnership with the Central Bank of Nigeria.
Hello and you're welcome to Business Highlights on Trust TV. On the show, we take a look at some of the biggest economic and business developments for the week and how they impact the average Nigerian. My name is Chamun Dabeng and I'll be your host. Now, the 2023 World Economic Forum held from the 16th to the 20th of January, and we'll be getting into that right after the break.
Now, as part of efforts to support Africa's goal of strengthening...
Now, looking at the activity chart, as you can see right here, a total volume of 130...
Created a Boko Haram crisis that at that time was restricted to Yobe.
How secure are they? You can see security men with blood.
This is the road leading up to the...
Or really, if you look at English squad, you are looking at EPL, you are looking at their names. You are not looking at...
This program is brought to you in partnership with the Central Bank of Nigeria.
Now, once again, world leaders in government, business and CSOs have convened for the World Economic Forum held in Switzerland. Now, the forum, which ended on Friday, consisted of discussions addressing the state of the world and focus on priorities ahead. Now, the theme for 2023 was cooperation in a fragmented world. The Minister of Finance, Budget and National Planning, Zainab Ahmed, and MD of the International Monetary Fund, Kristalina Georgieva, both spoke during the World Economic Forum. Let's take a listen.
It's indeed very difficult times. The world has been going through a number of crises, whether it's COVID or climate, several things that we have to cope with on a daily basis. It means we have to do more. We have to find how to do more with less, because the fiscal space is indeed very, very constrained. A lot of our resources is going towards debt service. So for every naira we spend, we try to see how do we get the most benefit from it. And that's one of the reasons why we had to take the decision to say, how does it affect women? Because not only because they're half of the population, but because they are further behind than the rest of the population, and also because they tend to, when you give a small woman small business money, they tend to manage it better, and therefore more results, more outcomes. And we need to do this on a consistent basis, and we need to do this according to our plan. So we did a medium-term national development plan that across all of the sectors in the plan, we had the gender lens. And we costed the plan to require $775 billion US. 15% of that plan is contribution is from the government. So we need to now also find how we can support private businesses, both large, small, as medium, as well as small enterprises, to contribute more to the economy.
We saw over 1.3 billion people lifted out of poverty to a great degree because of this integrated world economy. So if you don't like inflation, and I have this feeling that nobody likes it much, why would you want to see a world in which costs of production jump and prices go up and stay there systematically? So that we also look at something that matters to us a lot, cross-border payments and how the financial system operates. When you fragment the economy, you inevitably risk fragmenting what keeps us financially sound.
All right, that was the MD of IMF as well as the Minister of Finance, Budget and National Planning speaking at the World Economic Forum. Now, let me introduce my guests in the studio who will be joining me to highlight some of the key discussions that took place during the World Economic Forum. Now, I have political and economic analysts in the studio with me. Joseph Algo, you're welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
And we also have here with us policy analyst Faiz Mohammed Ali. You're welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me, John.
All right, that's great. All right, so what do you think about, everything that both of these women had actually talked about? There were a few points that, came up. You talked about poverty alleviation, talked about private businesses, you even talked about some of the, gender issues that we have, or the gender disparities that we're facing, and how much it's going to cost to actually fix that issue. Now, listening to these women, what do you think?
2023 has really been known among the attendees of the WEF Forum as the year of the polycrisis, a year where the differing issues that humanity is facing have become so interwoven and reciprocally damaging that they become ultimately harder to solve. But I think the key takeaway from this year is that the focus has largely been on the cost of living crisis that has enveloped the world, especially the developing world. Going into the WEF this year, most of the world's economists are expecting a recession to hit us sometime later in 2023. However, the key takeaway for me is that there seems to be an inconclusive solutions really from the world's policymakers now that the forum is over. What we have is a situation where the world's governments are in a bit of a bind, being they have to make the choice between supporting their citizens with tax breaks and subsidizing their various economies so as to ease the cost of living crisis versus raising interest rates so that they can combat inflation. However, combating inflation in that form is inevitably going to lead to the recession that everyone is trying to avoid. I think we're in a situation where there are differing ways, differing ideas on how to handle the crisis. We have seen the head of the World Bank, Ngozi Iweala, giving the advice to WTO, the World Trade Organization, Ngozi Iweala, giving the advice to especially developed economies not to engage in friendshoring. That is a practice whereby they are ensuring that supply lines lead only to friendly allies and other developed economies. What that does is that leaves developing countries in a bind, because while richer countries might be able to subsidize various sectors of their economies, it leaves developing nations in a situation whereby they are simply fighting higher costs on a worldwide scale.
All right, Joseph, what do you make of it?
So the central theme of the World Economic Forum was threats on globalization. You know, when you look at the ongoing Ukraine-Russia war, you look at China making advances across the South China Sea, Pacific nations. You see China trying to more or less reestablish the Silk Road, making inroads into Africa and trying to, last year we saw US-Africa Summit, we saw India-Africa Summit, we saw China. In past years we have seen China-Africa Summit. So there is that threat on globalization. Then you also have the issue of cost of living. You know, there's inflation, rising energy cost, chiefly because of the Ukraine-Russia war. You see gas situation in Europe. You see Germany going back to coal as a source of power. You see the wheat crisis. Of course, it's predicted that we're going to see the full extent of Ukraine not able to fulfill its own quota of supply of wheat. That's to the world. So there is that threat on globalization. There was also discussion on climate change. You know, and there are climate skeptics. There are people that are somewhere in the middle. There are people that are climate alarmist. So, and there was also discussion on crypto technology, chiefly cryptocurrency. So, but the chief discussion was really the threats on globalization. You know, and for me, looking at it from Africa as a Nigerian, I don't know what real takeaways any African nation
is getting from this entire discussion.
So because really, Africa has just taken a back seat in many of these global discussions. You know, Zelensky, for example, like last year, there was so much focus on trying to raise funds for the ongoing Ukraine war, but there was little to no attention really on the poverty issues in Africa, especially in sub-Saharan Africa. You know, thank God the Minister for Finance highlighted the fact that empowering women was key to really tackling poverty, because the truth is, if you empower, like they say, if you empower a woman, you're empowering the nation, the family, because families more or less depend on income to a large extent from the woman. So it's very, very important that whenever we have these meetings, global meetings, Africa needs to be very much involved. And we should not go there trying to go with the wind or go with the trend. We should really see how much of these global discussions really affect us. And when we see that the issues that are very particular to us are not being discussed, we should try as much as possible to put our feet down.
I like the fact that you say, you know, issues that are very particular to us are just being avoided. Now, the question in all of this really is, where does this leave Nigeria as a nation? We have so many things that are going on when it comes to, you know, global inflation. We really felt the brunt of it. We saw it in our own CPI figures. We saw it in the rise in multidimensional poverty within Nigeria. Where does this leave our country? Because we're looking at a global recession. And Nigeria's economy has not been the strongest, of course. So let me start off with you, Faiz.
Well, you see, I would argue that what we see now is that it's not that Africa's problems are not front and center, it's simply that Africa's problems are not priority. And they're not priority simply because the issues that the global economy is facing are being faced on multiple fronts. The world's financiers, mainly situated in Europe and North America, even with China right now, are coming off a very long period of stagnation, resulting from issues that we've had with COVID supply chains. And so the priority has been shifted from focusing on those problems and trying to ensure that inflation in the Western industrialized world stays between 1% and 2% as the year moves forward. And that means that attention has shifted from developing economies to developed economies as they try to shore up their own bases. What we've seen over the past several months really is volatility. Volatility in terms of prices, volatility in the oil market, volatility in terms of the monetary policies that the CBN has put in place. And what we can see now coming into the end of January is a little bit of an easing with regards to inflation, and that easing is due to actually came the oil price shows is that we're going to see a moderation in prices in the short term, not necessarily leading to a decrease in inflation, but a decrease in the rate at which commodity prices rise.
All right, I like that you actually brought this up because you're giving me a segue into our next discussion, which is Nigeria's latest CPI figures. And when we get back, I'm going to be facing you, Joseph. So we're going to take a short break, and when we get back, like I said, we'll be taking a look at inflation in Nigeria. Don't go anywhere.
documenting the Nigerian story.
This program is brought to you in partnership with the Central Bank of Nigeria.
You're welcome back to Business Highlights on Trust TV. My name is Chamun Dabeng and I'm still here with policy analyst Faiz Mohammed Ali, and we're also here with Joseph Ago, and he's an economic and political analyst. Now, we are taking a look at Nigeria's inflation rate. Now, after 11 long months, Nigeria finally got, should I say, some good news? Is that what I can use at this point? Because there are so many questions around it. Well, according to the National Bureau of Statistics, Nigeria's consumer price index declined from 21.47% in November to 21.34% in December 2022. Now, this basically negates every prediction that many economists gave last year. We expected to see another hike in the inflation, but no, we got a drop, and in December no less, which is usually a month where we normally see a spike. Yeah. Now, Faiz here gave us a couple of reasons as to why this could have happened. Do you agree? What do you think? Is it even possible to sustain this decline?
I think this drop is marginal. We're still in very much hot water, so. And for me, it's good on paper, but in reality, the situation is very bad. And of course, I mean, inflation can drive down, but the question is, do we have the necessary ingredients in place to really ensure that these downward trend continue? The answer for me is no, because the fundamentals are very much in place in such a way that Nigeria, it looks, I mean, looking into the future, there's the potential that inflation would rise. And given the fact that we're in a year where it is predicted that a third of the world economies will go into recession, I don't see how we can sustain this.
All right, Faiz, I saw you shaking your head a little bit. Now, what are your comments on this decline?
I do think that, especially in the last 2 months, there have been inklings that there would be a slight easing of the consumer price index and specifically of commodity prices in the short term. However, as we move into the next year, we're going to start to feel the full brunt of food shortages on a worldwide scale. And that is going to have a concomitant effect on commodity prices in Nigeria specifically. So I do think while the policies that are going to be in place, that have been in place, are going to result in slight easing over the next couple of months, it's going to be very difficult to see any real change in the long term, especially because we're still in a period of volatility regarding the political situation, regarding the upcoming election, regarding the economic policies that are currently in place through the CBN. So we're going to see a little more volatility as the year goes by, but from time to time, the moderation of prices is also going to be a factor that we will deal with.
Moderation of prices. Well, oftentimes when we see this type of inflation anyway, we usually have cases where, prices of things just go up and they just stay stagnant. They never really come down. So when you say moderation of, in prices, in which area are we looking at? Because it might not be food.
No, it might not be food. Specifically, we're looking at moderation in prices on a macro scale. So that might not necessarily mean that prices go down, but prices do stay stagnant for a particular period in time before inflation rises again.
All right. Anyway, let's talk a little bit about energy prices anyway, because right now we're looking at diesel, which is about 900, 1,000. PMS, we don't even have a unified price anymore. Some places are selling at 400, some places are selling at 350, and it's just a mess when it comes to this. Now, what is the impact of this? How does this affect us in the long run?
Of course, energy prices would definitely drive inflation. As a matter of fact, the cost of energy is at the heart of inflation. It affects transportation, affects production or manufacturing, also affects the logistics, that's movement of goods and services. So there was the rumor that the government secretly increased pump price to 185 naira, even though some people in government quarters are saying that that was
untrue,
a
inaccurate,
lie or an inaccurate information. But the truth is, like I've said previously, we are just trying to paper the cracks. There are structural issues that we have very much ignored all these years, and they are coming to haunt us. And I don't know if the current government or administration has a lot of time. I mean, obviously they don't have
not a lot of
time to really address those structural issues. But especially for the people campaigning, they should already have a think tank looking at these structural issues, and from day one, we should have ways or methods at addressing these structural issues. For me, energy prices will still go up. We're in winter. It's very difficult for ships to transport in record time in winter, and that's all going to affect us because we don't have installed capacity to produce PMS or diesel, kerosene. Gas is not fully utilized, so we still import gas. As much as we produce gas as a nation, we still import. So there's that energy dependence, and with these Russia-Ukraine crisis, with winter in place, with China trying to come online, because China, once they come online, they're going to require a lot of energy, and so they would compete with Nigeria in that energy market, and that would drive price, and these would affect the factors of production in Nigeria, and of course drive prices.
All right, Faiz, I want to come to you now. Monetary Policy Committee was going to be meeting very soon, next week on the 23rd and 24th. What do you expect? What is the outcome, or what do you think is going to be the outcome at the end of the day? Are we going to look at another policy tightening from the CBN?
I think that's inevitable, actually. Considering the volatility of the Naira over the past couple of months, you see the policies they've had in place ever since April of last year have been in place in order to ease not just the volatility of the Naira, but also the shortage of Forex. However, we've now come to realize that none of these policies have actually had the intended outcome. And so part of the reason that this is the case is that because there's always been a level of uncertainty with regards to which direction the CBN is going to be going, and I think that's going to continue over the next couple of months, at least until we have a new administration and we can have an idea of what policy direction is going to be entertained. So I do expect a further tightening of monetary policy and fiscal measures over the next couple of months, yes.
All right, Joseph, what do you think? Do you think it would be a mistake for the CBN to take that route by tightening by having another policy tightening? What do you think? If you can keep it within 30 seconds.
I think it will be a mistake. I think they should just maintain a status quo. And I think what the CBN should really focus on is on regulation. Because look at our banks. Banks are just they're more or less left to do as they like. So we should, the CBN should really focus on regulation, whether regulation of banking sector, regulation of insurance environment. The CBN should focus really on regulation. Fiscal or monetary tightening, I mean, all over the world, in America, in the UK, they are just trying to keep things as it is. They're not trying to cause any convulsion in the general economy. So regulation is very, very important. I think that's the way forward for the CBN.
All right, thank you very much. Well, at the end of the day, it's one thing to have a discussion, but what's more important is the way you carry out the methodology. How willing are you to actually stick through the process and make sure that these things actually, go the way you planned? All right, we have come to the end of our show for today, and I would like to thank my guests in the studio. Thank you so much, Joseph and Faiz, for being a part of the show. And to our viewers out there, thank you so much for watching. Please do not forget to follow us on our social media platforms. You can find us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at Trust TV News. Well, like I said, we've come to the end of the show. My name is Chamun Dabeng. Come back again. Let's talk numbers.
This program is brought to you in partnership with the Central Bank of Nigeria.